that's enough for me. I'm going to switch my video off, I think, and I'm going to hand over to you, Tao. Just going to stop this. So yeah, everybody's in the Zoom room, and please join me in welcoming Youcan Ren. If you could unmute yourself, that would be great.
Yes, unmuted. Can everyone see me okay? I'm now showing the first slide of my presentation, which is a beautiful layout of Chinese garden in the autumn.
I can see that perfectly. That's great.
Thank you very much. So without further ado, I will start my presentation today because I've realized I probably have too many slides and too little of time. So hi everyone, my name is Youcan Ren. I'm a landscape architect trained at Sheffield University. I also practiced in China's city Suzhou for a year for historical garden conservation and restoration. So many of my content today will be centered around garden in the Suzhou city and also the plants in these gardens. So hopefully after pandemic, you have time to experience out in your own gardens a little bit. And hopefully my talk today can give you a little guide regarding Chinese gardens and the meanings of their plants. So I roughly divided my presentation today into two parts. So in the first very brief part, I will give you an overview of the gardens that I'm talking about today, also an overview of the overall garden aesthetics in China. And in the second part, I will list out about 12 to 14 species of traditional Chinese garden plants and explain their meanings and applications. So China is a big country, obviously, and it has a very long history. So when we talk about Chinese garden, in fact, there are many Chinese gardens. And I always feel bad because for a very long while, people take gardens in Jiangnan region as the equivalent of Chinese garden. So Jiangnan region is around today's Shanghai metropolitan area. Hangzhou city, Suzhou city, and Shanghai are all included in the Jiangnan region. So this is the dominant area of garden culture. However, we also have Lingnan Garden in further South China, which is around today's Guangdong area, very close to Hong Kong. In the meanwhile, we also have the Imperial Gardens in Beijing, which is the capital of China. So I myself is from Jiangnan region. I'm from Hangzhou city, so right in the middle of Jiangnan. So I'm probably a bit biased, and because I come from Jiangnan, and I will be talking about Jiangnan plants. But again, I think Jiangnan gardens are of representative of Chinese garden system, and its plants are widely used. So this justifies my point today. So I'm going to use Jiangnan Garden as my example, but please do note that we have many, many other gardens in China that's worth visiting. So the gardens in Jiangnan has particularly cultural backgrounds. China now has 10 World Heritage Site gardens. Only one of them is in Beijing, which is Royal Garden. The rest 9 of them are all in Jiangnan. I say this proudly. And 8 of them are in Suzhou, I think. So name of these gardens are quite explicit because most of these gardens are owned by members of China's gentry class. So they're either retired or retreated court officials, or they are gentry members that are waiting to be appointed by the Chinese court. So they have wealth and they have social class. That's why they have the time and leisure to develop garden and garden culture, and their understanding of garden and garden plants was shared by the whole society. So if we look at the names of many World Heritage Gardens here, I think it's quite straightforward that who used to own this garden and who developed this garden. For example, the Humble Administrator's Garden, or the Garden of Cultivation, or the Retreat and Reflection Garden. These were all owned by retired court officials. So this is the specific cultural context of Jiangnan Garden. They are the possessions of gentry class. So I'm just going to give you a little bit historical context to Jiangnan Garden. So Jiangnan Garden has extremely long history, but in China's Ming Dynasty, which is 14th century to 17th century, the garden culture in Jiangnan really flourished and reached to its peak. So the Ming aesthetics were taken as a representative of China's Han culture, and it is really about the attention to details and great simplicity. But of course, simplicity doesn't mean simple. In fact, the techniques of Ming's furniture making and china making, as well as garden making, was so high that it was barely replicated by its following dynasty of Qing, which is the last dynasty of China, Imperial China. So in my architect's eyes, Ming's aesthetic principle is very much like 1950s architectural movement in the West, which is less is more. So that means we cut down all the unnecessary decorations and unnecessary details, but focus on the artifact and the connection between artifact and man solely, so that we will obtain our inner peace. So just to try to make a comparison between Ming's aesthetic value and the following dynasty, Qing's aesthetic value, you can easily tell the Ming's pursuit of simplicity in all art making, in fact. Of course, I think I'm exaggerating the comparison a little bit, because in early Qing dynasty, simplicity was still widely appreciated. But this is just overall change of the two dynasties, that in Ming dynasty, the gentry class were very much about the inner connection between man and artifacts, also between man and nature. And they were very much about the attention on details, materials, and simplicities. And this has been adopted in planting design as well. And we will come to that shortly. So just to give you a demonstration about what fine art in Ming look like and what garden life in Ming Dynasty look like. These three paintings here demonstrate vividly how life was like in Ming's gardens. In the picture in the middle, we can clearly see these gardens were owned by gentry class. They were officials of the court, so they were served by other people, and they have the time and leisure to sit in a beautifully designed garden surrounded by bamboos and beautiful rockwoods. Another thing I want to particularly address as a woman landscape architect is I think Ming's garden culture was very important to contemporary women. Because these gardens were privately owned, and they create this very private space that is separated from outside world, that the female members of gentry class were allowed to enjoy themselves in the gardens. So if we have a look at the picture on the left-hand side, it is very clear that in Ming Dynasty, women of gentry class were visiting the garden, and it was one of their main leisures of everyday lives. And flowers obviously plays a very important part in their everyday leisure. On the right-hand side, the picture shows us a very popular game among gentry women, which is called, translated as the Battle of Plants. So these women will often collect different plants and flowers and to compare with each other. So whoever collects the most plants and whoever can name out the most plants actually wins the game. So garden and plants was very much important to women at that time, who enjoy very limited freedom, in fact. So my talk today, especially my list of plants today, are very much related to this guy on the left-hand side called Wen Zhenhen. So you don't have to memorize his name, but just remember the pronunciation, Wen Zhenhen. He is a renowned scholar by the end of Ming Dynasty. And he wrote this book named The Book of Superfluous Things. And he made a perfect comment about the content of the book. He said, this book is about something that you cannot eat when you feel hungry. And you cannot wear it when you feel cold. But you cannot live without it. This is art. So in this book, he summarized what he thinks is art in the Ming Dynasty. And the reason this book is important is that Wen Zhengheng himself is a renowned scholar. So he's a representative of Ming's gentry class. Also, he is the great-grandson of one of Ming's most renowned scholar, painter, and landscape architect. So what he said was taken by the whole society as the principle of garden making and as contemporary art. So he is in fact very critical, and I will elaborate this later, but he made a lot of comments about plants. So his book has 12 chapters, and plants is listed in the 2nd chapter. So that shows us how important garden plants was to Ming society. And how important it was. So in the following Qing dynasty, Qing's emperor visited Jiangnan region for 6 times. And he was so jealous of Jiangnan garden and so intrigued by Jiangnan garden that he developed his own Jiangnan garden in Beijing, so in his imperial garden. So the 2 pictures on the outside of the slide are actually Jiangnan gardens in real Jiangnan region. So one is in Suzhou, and the one on the right up corner is in Hangzhou, which is the famous West Lake, while the 2 pictures on the bottom part of the slide is in fact the replicated imperial garden in Beijing, but it looks extremely similar to Jiangnan garden. So our lovely teacher of Confucius Institute back in Beijing sent us some lovely videos about flower blossom in Beijing at this time in very late May. And I think we're very lucky to capture some of the still blossoming flower. And my point here being, I think the March and May is really the best season to enjoy flower and garden. And I think this talk really comes in the perfect timing, because because of time limit, I'm just going to show you shortly about these videos. But this is Beijing in May, and these flowers will all be introduced in my following talk. And these are exceptional climbing rose. And these are Beijing's peach blossom. I think we captured their probably last week flower season. And these are Chinese peonies, also very lucky because they usually stop flowering in June. Rhododendron. I think it's lucky that our teachers in Beijing, because in Jiangnan area this time, all these flowers will already be gone because the weather is much warmer. Some beautiful lettuce and some beautiful bamboos. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I will come to explanation of these plants in my shortcoming talk. So I'm going to dive right into the introduction of garden plants and their meanings. The first plant I'm going to introduce you is magnolia. And I'm not afraid to say that this is definitely my favorite plant. So this picture here on left-hand side, I'm echoing myself. On the left-hand side, can everyone please mute themselves? So the picture here on up left-hand side is a picture I actually taken from my old office when I was working in one of Suzhou's garden for garden conservation. magnolia blossom in early March and it lasts probably to April, depends on the weather. And to me, it is really the first sign of spring. And every time I sit in my very beautiful but small office, I look outside the window. When I see magnolia, I know spring is here in Suzhou Gardens. And magnolia is widely appreciated by traditional Chinese garden for multiple reasons. So A, the shape of it before its full blossom, it looks very much like brush pen, which Chinese people use to perform calligraphy. So this means these gentry class who developed the garden appreciate the shape of the flower because brush pen were very important to them because they write and they're scholars. Another reason that magnolia is widely favored in traditional garden is because it's the pronunciation of its name. So its name in Chinese pronounced as Yulan. So Yu means jade and Lan means orchid. So jade orchid, because of its pure color, it looks like it's made of jade. And in fact, jade orchid in traditional Chinese language is often used to describe someone's outstanding manner and beautiful appearance. So planting magnolia in traditional garden is often taken as a good wish to the family's heir. It means that they have good manners and they're raised by a good family. To do so, they have a set principle for magnolia. So magnolia, especially white magnolia, always grow in pair and in front of architecture in the courtyard. So having a pair of magnolia in the courtyard means it is a good family and it is a family of manner. Often magnolia is planted in front of important architecture because we need to send this good wish to the household. So when you see a pair of white magnolia in the courtyard, you would know more or less that this architecture is of certain importance in the garden. So magnolia usually has two colors. One is a purple and lilac-ish color, and one is white. The white one is more commonly seen, and I think it reminds people more of its jade character, but they are equally valued, so they are equally favored. Traditional Chinese culture sometimes give hierarchies to colors of flowers, but in the case of magnolia, colors doesn't matter. As long as it's magnolia, it's hugely favored by traditional Chinese garden culture. And as long as it's magnolia, it sends good wish to the family hold. On the bottom of the slide here, I put down the names of the gardens, just in case you have the chance to travel to China and travel to Suzhou to visit all the gardens. And these names I listed here are the best garden to visit to have a look at magnolia. And second flower is also very interesting, is peach blossom. I think it is not very commonly seen in the UK, at least not in my region. I live in Sheffield, but it is extremely common in China. And peach blossom has been given multiple interesting meanings. So the first meaning of peach blossom is sincere love. So particularly first love. So if you are ever in love with someone and you think it's the love of your life or it's your first love, give he or she a bunch of peach blossom. It will send the message of love. So this message of love that's attached to peach blossom has a long history in China. But peach blossom is also interesting because it has another meaning. So in China's folk culture and in Taoism, peach blossom, the peach tree, is believed to be divine. So the wood of peach wood, is believed to have the ability to keep all the evil away. So in Taoism, a sword made from peach wood is a very powerful tool to keep all the devils away. So I thought it's very convenient to have a peach blossom in your garden. It sends a message of love, and it also keeps the devils away, which I think it's multifunctional. But peach blossom is not widely used in traditional garden for one reason, and probably one reason only, is that it has very short flowering season. Every year it starts blossom in probably very early March, and usually it only lasts for 10 days. So some people, well, sometimes in traditional Chinese culture, it's taken as a sign of short life. So you do see peach blossom in traditional Chinese garden, but not too many. But it's still one of my favorite flower, without saying. And again, I've put down two names of two gardens that's best for visit for peach blossom. And peach blossom is Chinese name Tao Hua, also because it has this message of love. So it is also attached with a romantic relationship. So in China, when you say, I'm having a peach blossom fortune, 桃花运, it means you're involved in a romantic relationship. And camellia. Camellia is not attached with too many symbolic meanings, but it is very much preferred in traditional garden because it has an extremely long flowering season. It starts blossom in Jiangnan region. It starts blossoming in March. It can last until very late autumn, and certain species also keep flowering in the autumn and early winter. So especially in summer and autumn, when there is not many colors in traditional garden, camellia is very much favored. And because it also blossoms in March, very similar to magnolia, they're often paired together because the red color of camellia goes very well with the white color of magnolia. And then here it comes to probably early April to May, which is the time for multiflower rose to blossom. And this flower is favored in traditional garden because it is climbing and it is a great way to create privacy, particularly for the ladies of the family, so that the ladies can come out and enjoy the garden without being noticed by the outside world. And the garden of cultivation is the best place, definitely the best place to go in whole China to visit climbing rose, because in May, the whole garden is fulfilled by beautiful flower. And the flowering season lasts for about more than a month. An interesting story here is one of China's most important literal work, The Story of the Stone, actually describes how ladies of a family use climbing rose in the garden. So if we look at the picture down here, this girl was in fact in love with someone that she just met once. And she, at the moment when painting was joined, she was thinking of the man, but she didn't want to be seen by the others. That's why she chose to hide under the climbing rose, which also tell us that climbing rose, the function of climbing rose is about privacy. And because it creates privacy, the flower is often associated with the ladies. Duzhenhua is a flower that's attached with special meaning. So in Chinese folk culture, the redness of the flower comes from the blood of an emperor who died from worrying his people. So scholars often keep a pot of Duzhenhua either in the garden or within our architecture as a reminder of their duty. So they have to always think about the people, just like the emperor did. It is often keep as small shrubs in the garden, and it's quite easy to be maintained as long as it's keep away from direct sunlight. It can also be kept in pot. It grows quite well in the pot because it does not need much sunlight. So it is a perfect choice for indoor planting as well. And here goes another of my favorite plants, Wisteria. Wisteria is always liked in traditional Chinese planting, but it has been attached a special meaning in the Ming Dynasty. And this is Wisteria in the humble and administrator's garden, and it is one of the most famous things in Chinese garden history, probably. And that is because this particular Wisteria we're looking at has 400 years, over 400 years of history, and it is planted by the scholar named Wen Zhenming, which is the great-grandfather of Wen Zhenhen, who wrote the book about Ming's artifact. So Wen Zhenming was an outstanding scholar and painter who in fact participated in the design and development of humble administrator's garden, which is one of the most important gardens in Chinese garden history. And he is guy here on the left-hand side, and Wen Zhenhen, his great-grandson, is the guy on the right-hand side. So I'm not sure if you can tell the resemblance, but they are directly related to each other. So the appreciation of garden culture, in fact, runs in Wen's family. And this particular wisteria, planted by Wen Zhenming over 400 years ago, was given a special name called scholarly wisteria. So Wenten instead of Ziten, Zi means purple. So people believe that this particular wisteria stands for the spirit of Chinese scholars. And this is why we designed Wisteria in Manchester Confucius Institute SIART, because it stands for scholarly spirit. Again, I've put down the names of two gardens that's famous for Wisteria, but if you have limited time, please do go to Humble Administrator's Garden in late April or May, which is the best time to enjoy the view of Wisteria. And a very small tip here, just in case you've ever got a chance to travel to Suzhou. So Suzhou Museum is in fact selling the seed of this particular wisteria every year, but it is limited edition because they only produce certain amount of seeds every year. I think 3,000 per year. So every year in September, you can in fact log into the museum's website or go to the museum and purchase a box of the seed of scholarly wisteria. It is very cheap. It only costs, I think, £3, but it's very hard to get. I was never ever lucky until 2017. So if anyone's interested, do get yourself prepared in very early September, because that's when the pre-sale starts. Peony is also very interesting because I think in English language, the common name of peony has included over 100 or 200 species, whereas in China, peony were carefully distinguished from each other. So it is distinguished between tree peony and Chinese peony. So I'm going to introduce tree peony first. In Chinese language, the name of flower, tree peony, is called mudan, and mudan is really an important flower in Chinese planting because it is recognized the queen of the king of the flower, but because I'm a woman, I automatically say queen. So it is the king of all flower, and its yellow color and purple color are especially liked by Chinese people because it represents prosperity of the whole country. So in the Lingui garden, peony and rockwood always go together, and it is also one of the principles that Wen Zhenhen stated in his book, that peony, the king of flower, shall always be accompanied by great rockwood. So it has been executed perfectly in the Lingui garden, as we can see. So it is always planted next to huge rockwood to reflect on its beautiful color. And Chinese peony, which looks very similar to tree peony, is named Shaoyao in Chinese language. And Shaoyao is recognized the minister of all flower. So tree peony is the king and Chinese peony is the minister. So the only rule that Wen Zhenhen stated in his book about peonies is that tree peony and Chinese peony should not be planted together because one is the king and one is the minister. So it is best for these two flowers to keep a certain distance. By the look of the flowers, people often get confused about tree peony and Chinese peony because they indeed look extremely similar. But tree peony is in fact a perennial woody plant, while Chinese peony is perennial herb. So if we look at the roots of two plants, the differences are quite obvious. So on the left-hand side is the root of tree peony, which, as the name indicates, is in fact a tree, whereas the roots of Chinese peony on the right-hand side are separated herb stems. These leaves are also quite different because Chinese peony's leaf on the right-hand side has this darker green color, and it also has a wax texture, and the shape of the leaves are much more regular, almost like individual little olive shapes combined together. Whereas on the left-hand side, the leaf of tree peony are much more irregular, and it is a lighter green in a sense. So if we look back to this picture, we can easily tell that on the left-hand side, by the look of the leaf, is Chinese peony, whereas on the right-hand side, by the look of leaf, is tree peony. In Lingering Garden, they have this program that artists perform Quen opera next to the tree peony, because a famous part of the Quen opera is named Mudanting, so the pavilion of peony. So if you ever get a chance to visit, this is where to go to have a look at the beautiful tree peonies. I will end the spring by lotus. Lotus, in fact, starts blossoming in June or July, depends on which parts of the China it is. In Jiangnan region, you can start noticing beautiful lotus blossom, I think, in mid-June. Humboldt Administrator's Garden is the best place to go to visit lotus flower. They've got a huge water area, huge ponds surrounding the architectures, where in the summer it is full of lotus. And the smell of lotus is very much liked by the Chinese because it is very elegant and very subtle. So it is often that in the summer, within a garden, you can keep all the windows and doors open and just let the wind to bring in the subtle fragrance of lotus flower and lotus leaves. And it is often considered a very elegant thing to sit next to the water and smell the lotus. Instead of planting them in a huge pond, of course, you can also put them into pots. This is how people grow lotus in Humboldt Administrator's Garden. So if you have limited space, or if you want to appreciate lotus indoor, a huge pot is also a great choice. The Chinese believe that even the dead lotus is full of zenness because it represents calmness. So often in garden, they keep the dead lotus leaves for a while until the winter comes, because when the rain drop onto the dead lotus leaves, it creates pleasant sounds. Hardy banana is also a plant that goes very well to both rock work and ring sound. So often hardy banana will be planted in a corner of a garden next to a rock work. And when it rings, the sound, the raindrop drop onto the leaves of hardy banana is considered a very enjoyable thing to do. In Humboldt Administrator's Garden, there is architecture that's designed with huge windows and doors, and it's surrounded by hardy banana. And the name of the architecture is called Listen to the Raindrop. So it is particularly designed to wait for the rain to drop on the leaves of hardy banana, so that the sound sounds like a music to the garden owner's ears. And Humboldt Administrator's Garden has this night visit program, which they use lightning show and virtual reality to create different sceneries at night. And at night, this architecture of listening to the raindrop is surrounded by lightning show that mimic the look of raindrop, and it is also accompanied by sound of raindrop to recreate what the garden owner felt when he planted these hardy bananas. Bamboo is extremely common in Chinese planting. It can be used as a screen to keep privacy of a garden, as we see from this picture. But I personally like it plant in a very quiet and limited way, which you don't plant too many bamboos at once. There's also a reason of doing that. It's because bamboo's roots grow very, very quickly. So if you grow them too close to your wall, or you grow too many at once, the root of bamboo will very much likely destroy your wall. So in Chinese gardens, it is executed in a certain way that we don't plant too many at the same time. And it is against the wall, so that when the sun comes out, the shadow of bamboo and bamboo leaves create beautiful scenery on the wall, as if it's a painting. And this has been adopted by the famous American Chinese architect I.M. Pei when he was designing Suzhou Museum. And this is how he used bamboo features in the modern architecture of Suzhou Museum. He used the traditional white wall as if it's a paint kind of, and the shadows of bamboo and bamboo leaves create the painting. And bamboo is liked by Chinese scholar because it represents noble character, because bamboo doesn't bend over, it only breaks. So it means it's very noble. It doesn't knee over anything, even if it's a super power, it only breaks. So it insists on its own stand. So bamboo is often associated with man with virtue, which in Chinese means 君子. So nobleman is equal to bamboo. And it is a traditional saying that when a nobleman travels along without a friend, he befriends the bamboos because they are of equal virtues. And here comes another of my favorite plants, sweet osmanthus, 桂花 in Chinese language. 桂花 is in fact the city tree of Suzhou, and you can tell how important it is to the place. It is also the city tree of Hangzhou, which is another place famous for its landscape. So the species of 桂花 varies, but they're in fact very similar. Usually we see 3 different colors of 桂花. So one is the one on the left-hand side, which is the pale yellow one. This is the most common one, and it has the sweetest fragrance ever. So it is widely used in both traditional garden and in contemporary Chinese landscape architecture. We also have one called red 桂花, which is the one on the upright corner, and the golden 桂花, which is the one on in the other corner, but they are equally adored by the Chinese. So there's no huge difference between the species. I think the fragrance is slightly different, but they are all very sweet. So I like them equally. And the name of 桂花, the word 桂 means noble in Chinese language. So very much like magnolia, it represents good wish to the family hold. So also very much like magnolia, it can be planted in pairs in front of the architecture within a courtyard to indicate that this family hold is with noble characters. And flower of guihua is edible. So in September and October, when the flower drops from the tree, people in Jiangnan collect these flowers and integrate them into everyday cooking. So as you can see from the slide, it can be used as a stuffing of traditional Chinese pastry. It can be baked together with chestnuts. And the one I really recommend is the one on the right down corner, that you marinate guihua with either cane sugar or honey for about 2 weeks to a month. Then you will have the sweetest and most fragrant thing ever. And it goes well with every dessert, every bread, and it's definitely recommended. Guihua, either dried or fresh, also goes very well with green tea. So if you have the chance to collect some dried or fresh guihua, do try them out with your green tea. It brings extra fragrance into the tea, and it goes really well together because they each have the very subtle fragrance. Maple is very important, particularly in autumn, because this is when within the garden there's not many colors around. It is for the similar reason that camellia is very much used, because some camellia will still be flowering in autumn. So maple is recommended to be planted next to water, because when the red leaves drop into the water and go with the water flow to every part of the garden, it is considered a very elegant thing. And in Chinese folk culture, back in Tang and Song dynasty, ladies in court were not allowed to go back home for a very long period until they reached to a certain age. So often these ladies feel very lonely. So folk story says that they will write poems and notes on these red leaves of maple and put them into water and let the leaf travel outside of the court and outside the garden with the water flow to express their feelings. So maple is also a very romantic plant in Chinese culture, in fact. And here we come to winter, but the Chinese planting insists that we should always have flower across the 4 seasons, even in the coldest winter. And that is why winter sweet is much valued by Chinese planting culture, because it blossoms in the coldest winter in December and January. And it has the sweetest smell. So imagine when we're in a garden and it is snow everywhere, it is quiet, but you can detect the subtle fragrance of winter sweet, and that brings you joy, and that reminds you that this garden is still very much alive. So winter sweet is also recommended to be planted in the corner of a yard or of a garden, but better in the south corner or the southwest corner, because it needs much sunlight, and it is also recommended to be accompanied by rock work. Very similar to winter sweet, pine tree or songshu in Chinese language also represents noble character, because it is evergreen. It can be alive for a very long time. It keeps growing and it can survive the coldest winter. So these paintings here represent how the scholars consider pine tree as a reflection of their virtue and noble character, because they can survive any difficult situation and they don't give up their own stand. So pine tree, bamboo, and winter sweet, those who can survive the coldest winter, are named 岁寒三友, so the 3 friends of winter. So these 3 plants combined together represent the virtue that Chinese scholars were pursuing. And they were often represented in Chinese fine art, in paintings and artifacts, as a reminder and a reflection of what we're pursuing. So every time when you see a painting or articraft that combines bamboo, pine tree, and winter sweet together, you know it is an indication of good virtue and noble character of the Chinese. These plants are, of course, highly recommended in the garden because it keeps the garden alive in the coldest winter. So by the end of this talk, I want to promote one of my colleagues' Twitter account, which is Gardens of China. So my colleagues is working on Lingnan Garden, which is the garden I did not mention today. So this account, Garden of China, keep posting about garden cultures and planting cultures of China. So if you're on Twitter, do follow the account, and we will be updating new researches, paintings, and informations on this account. And here's my today's talk. I hope it's somewhat useful to all of you. And thank you very much. You're muted, Tabia.
Sorry. Thank you so much. If you wouldn't mind, stop the share, and then
Yes.
we'll be a bit more visible to everybody. I will spotlight myself as well, so that should be great. Thank you so much. This has been really interesting how you just took us through a whole year with those fantastic pictures. It was almost like transported to China for 40 minutes. Great. We've got lots of questions, and I'm going to read them out chronological as well. So the first one, the first couple of questions really refer to the beginning of your talk. Jeanette would like to know what you're referring to when you mentioned Han culture. I understand that's probably not answered in a couple of sentences, but yeah, maybe briefly explain.
So Han culture is a culture of the dominant, the main ethnic group in China. So Hanzu we have 56 ethnic groups in China. Hanzu takes about over 90% of the population, or even more. I have to look into that, but definitely more than 90%. So it's the majority of Chinese population, and it is the dominant culture of Chinese culture. So sometimes when we see Hanzu or Han culture, people take it for granted and think it's very much the equivalent of Chinese culture. But still, we've got other 55 ethnic groups. But in Jiangnan region, it's very much overlapping. So Han culture and Jiangnan region's culture is almost identical because that's where Han is based at. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. Kim is asking, did men also spend time in the gardens, or was it mainly women who spent that time there?
Men definitely also spent time in gardens, but most of the time they are separated to keep a certain distance, unless it's in the same household or very close related household of families or friends or colleagues. But the activities they do are slightly different. So if you remember one of my slides that's showing the paintings of Ming people in the gardens, when men are in garden, I think this is a bit condescending, but this is what they did back in the time. They paint, they practice calligraphy, and they talk with the court colleagues about politics, life, and Taoism philosophy, whereas women are mostly taking it as a leisure to simply look at flowers. And so I think the content is slightly different, but men definitely also spend much time in the garden and often invite your court colleagues to your garden as a show off of your power and taste. So if you have a good garden, it is a very honorable thing, apparently.
Great. The next question is about climate change. Artis is asking if climate change is impacting on the times that the flowers are blossoming.
Definitely, I think this is a brilliant question. So I will answer the question from my personal story. So I obviously grew up in Hangzhou. So my home is a small town that has a lot of water bodies around the town. So it is planted with many lotus flower. So I remember when I was little, the flowers start blossoming in July or very late June. But now I see lotus blossom in early June all the time. So I think this warming is affecting on the flowering season very much. The same thing also, well, according to my observation, also happened to peach blossom and magnolia, because I used to work in a garden, so I keep an eye on the plants all the time, like basically every day. And I do notice the flowering season of magnolia is slightly earlier than before, probably a few days, but I think it is impacted.
Right, interesting. Now there's quite a few questions about flowers. Colette has shared with us that she's got a yellow bird magnolia, and she's asking if there is any relevance for yellow magnolia, or is it just mainly lilac and white as is shown on the pictures?
I think it is mainly lilac and white, simply because the yellow ones are less commonly seen for some reason. I can't give you a very certain answer right now, but I can definitely look into this and email back. But yellow ones are very less commonly seen, at least in Jiangnan region. I think I personally haven't seen any yellow magnolia in traditional gardens for some odd reason. But then again, as I said, the color of magnolia will not attach with hierarchy. So I think it's equally precious.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to research anything and share with everyone at a later stage, I will follow this up with an email, and I share the link of the recording so you can watch it back. And also any unanswered question we can cover then as well. The next question, are there any well-known women landscape architects in Chinese history?
Great question, and I shall write an article about this. Thank you very much for the question. I think women are definitely anonymized in Imperial China for obvious reason. But garden is in fact slightly different because we've got many garden paintings that demonstrate women's activity in gardens. And I'm not sure if you recall, there is one garden among the 9 World Heritage Gardens that I listed out, which is also the garden I supposed to promote, but I forgot. It's the garden behind me that I used as background. This garden is called the Couple's Garden. So it is designed and developed by a couple in Qing Dynasty. So this is a very evident recording of women landscape architects in Chinese history. But further earlier, I wouldn't say there are many women landscape architects being recognized. They're definitely under-recognized, but sadly, no.
Okay. Paul's saying that he knows that many features of Japanese culture were first imported from China. And he's asking, was the Japanese garden culture influenced by Chinese gardens?
Definitely. I have to say I'm not an expert in Japanese garden, but being a landscape architect, what I can say is that we share many similar symbolic meanings of plants. For example, the 3 friends of the winter sweet, pine tree, and bamboo are considered with very similar meaning in both China and Japan because of their representation of noble character and virtue. That's as far as I can get. I think the plants are used in very similar way, and some of the symbolic meanings are very similar. But in terms of the arrangement of water and rock work, I think that's where the differences lies at. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. Ruth is asking, do all the plants that were featured in your talk grow as well in the UK as they are in China, or do some struggle to survive here?
I think I didn't see many peach blossom in the UK for some reason. If you do, please do raise your hand in Zoom and let me know where I can find them. I also tried I think I'm not supposed to say this openly. I also try to smoke in a small winter sweet plant from China some while ago and try to plant them. But winter sweet needs plenty of sunlight, and it does not work in the UK in the winter because we always struggle. I mean, I struggle with all the dose of vitamin D, so my plant did not survive. So I think winter sweet is not very easy to be grown here in the UK.
Okay. There's quite a lot of comments. I will share them with you afterwards, so perhaps you want to give me the answers to those, and I will email them. But if we've got a couple of more minutes for a couple of more questions.
Sorry, I just want to further answer the previous question about which plants are struggling in the UK. Another plant I barely see in the UK is the sweet osmanthus, because it requires very warm weather in the autumn, and it also requires a lot of sunlight, not just for its survival, but also for the produce of its fragrancy. So two plants, sweet osmanthus and winter sweet.
There's one question. Mitch is asking, how did the gardens fare during the Cultural Revolution?
Many gardens were damaged during Cultural Revolution. So the couple's garden, if I remember correctly, many of the rock work were destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. But they were successfully restored afterwards, after the reform and opening up in 1987. So I'm very happy to say that currently the all 9 World Heritage Gardens in Jiangnan region are repaired and restored as similar as possible to its historical format.
Okay. And one last question. There's too many to choose from, but Diana's asking, does rock work and water bodies have symbolism in the garden, or are they just included for their aesthetics value?
It's mostly for the aesthetic volume, but there is very carefully developed principles for that. I in fact included a slide in my previous point, but then I thought I might run over time, so I take that away. A colleague of mine back in Sheffield was actually doing research on rock work of traditional Chinese garden. I can introduce you briefly. So if you can look at the rock works on the background, these are not the best rock works. So the best ones, if you remember, on one of the slides of Chi Peony are the very tall and leaky ones. So people have very certain rules about that last until today, is that a good rock work should look very slim. So it shouldn't be chunky. It should be very slim. It should be very leaky, which means it should have holes on it. And it should have many wrinkles. So in fact, I think in common aesthetics, it might look ugly because it's so wrinkled and it's so slim and it has many holes. But in traditional Chinese garden, it is considered the most beautiful. And this is why the rock work from Suzhou region, from Taihu, so a huge lake in Suzhou region, is considered the best because the wave of the lake water creates many wrinkles and holes on the rocks. And these rocks are so adored that in Song Dynasty, Emperor wants to transport these rocks to Beijing for his own enjoyment, and essentially lead to the destroyment of the whole country because he spent too much.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's all we've got time for today. Unfortunately, I feel like we can talk on for ages. But yes, I will email you all, and if you have any more comments or questions, you can always reply to that email next week. Thank you so much from the Confucius Institute to Dr. Ren tonight for taking the time to talk us through some beautiful flowers and some beautiful arrangements and the meaning of it all. Truly inspiring to go out and look for those plants and flowers.
I think the pleasure's on mine, and I hope you will have the opportunity to visit China very soon when this amber list is lifted. So you can look out for some beautiful plants in China as well.
Yes, if you are not able to travel all the way to China, but you're local to Manchester, you might know that the RHS Bridgewater has opened last week, and they've got Chinese garden there as well. I think it's in the early developing stages, so but that's definitely worth a visit, I think. And then there's a Manchester Flower Show happening next week. So the businesses and shops and cultural organisations are all creating beautiful floral display all the way through Manchester, and we are contributing that by sharing flowers from China on our social media channels. So yes, thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and thank you, Tao, for such a fantastic talk.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.